he says, then it could be a fluctuation of this energy in empty space. And what you have to understand, as I say, is that empty space doesn't exist before that south pole of the universe exists.
It kind of reminds me of the joke that where the man was going to create. And he's going to have this bet with God, and he says first you take dirt and you create life, and God says you got to get your own dirt.
You got to get your own space-time.
Exactly. And so he's already starting with God's dirt, if you will, to move further on in his description of the subsequent creation of the universe. And that's
and as I say, Greg, a careful reading of the book makes this very clear. I'm not trying to read something in here. It's explicit, and so it really, I think, shows that the claims that are in the newspapers that they put out to pump the book, to market it, they're just nothing but hype.
Mm-hmm.
I really look at this book, read carefully, as being quite confirmatory of the cosmological argument.
Very interesting. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the many worlds hypothesis. This comes up too, and it's as far as I understand, the chief rejoinder to the design argument for the existence of God. We're talking with William Lane Craig. Back in just a moment on Stand to Reason. Greg Koukl back with you here in our final segment with Dr. William Lane Craig on Stand to Reason, talking about Stephen Hawking's book, The Grand Design. Bill, how is this book being received, just generally speaking, among his contemporaries and colleagues? You mentioned something about the affront that his opening was to the philosophers of Cambridge and everywhere, really. Philosophy is dead. Yes. And then also to others in the area of math and physics.
Well, I've been very pleased, Greg, by the reviews that I've read by people like Roger Penrose or a physicist I believe it was in The Economist. People are not being fooled by the book, at least professional scientists and philosophers are not. Mm-hmm. And they are making these very same critical comments that you and I have been making this evening. So if you look at the reviews that are out there by professional colleagues of the book, they have been very critical.
Right. Well, Roger Penrose was one of his colleagues that worked with him on the Standard Big Bang Project, I think back in the 70s, a paper they wrote, and working with Einstein's general relativity, and bring me up to date on that.
Right. He developed the singularity theorems that proved that the Big Bang went back to a singularity, and these are called the Hawking-Penrose singularity theorems. So Penrose is a man of equal the scientific stature of Stephen Hawking.
An able critic.
And the thing that Penrose spots and protests in his review is precisely this wild anti-realism of Hawking and Mlodinow that we spoke of near the beginning of our interview.
Yes, why don't you take a moment and explain what that is? For a lot of folks may not be tracking with that concept.
What they hold is that there is no objective reality out there independent of our models of reality. And what a model is for them is a sort of way of organizing your sense perceptions that come into your brain through your five senses. And you organize these in some way. And they will say that there is no reality about the way the world actually is. It's just these different ways of modeling it.
These useful fictions, kind of.
Yeah, that's right. All you can say is that one model is more convenient than another, but it is not more correct or more accurate because, and it's not that we don't know the way reality is, Greg. On their view, there is no objective reality independent of these models. So they actually say, get this, at one point in the book, that there is no objective fact of the matter whether the young Earth creationist is right or the Big Bang cosmologist is right. Young Earth creationism and Big Bang cosmology are equally valid models of reality, and it's meaningless to say which one describes the way the world really is because it's just model dependent, and all we can say is that the Big Bang is a more convenient model than young Earth creationism.
It just seems to me that this is like one contradiction after another, because this is just another way that his whole thesis is undermined. Because what are we to make of his scientific determinism, which is the view that he doesn't argue for, but simply assumes, and he bases the larger part of his book on this notion. What are we to take that as a real or accurate depiction of the way the world actually is? I guess not.
It's just his model, and someone who has a model of the world that includes free agents is just as valid as his view.
Man, was there I thought I heard somebody say that right towards the end of his book, he affirmed free will, contrary to what he said at the beginning of the book. Are you familiar with this?
No, I did not catch that anywhere in the book. Now, I could have missed it, but I didn't see that anywhere.
Let's talk about the many worlds hypothesis. We just got about 6 or 7 more minutes here, and I know it's not much time to cover this, but maybe you could explain how this hypothesis is meant to be a rejoinder to the claim that the universe looks designed, fine-tuned, because it actually was designed or fine-tuned.
What the many worlds theorist wants to say is that the fine-tuning of the universe is just an accident due to chance. It is pure chance. Now, if you had to roll the roulette wheel and predict what number it would come up on, you would have very, very small chance of being right. But if you had 1,000 or 10,000 roulette wheels all spinning simultaneously, then the chances are good that your number will come up on one of them at least. And so the idea here is, by having all of these invisible parallel universes out there, by chance alone, if they're randomly ordered, and that's a big if, then in one of them at least you'll have fine-tuning, and the observers in that world will look out at their universe and marvel at how well-designed it is, not realizing that there are all these other universes unknown to them in which the constants and quantities of nature are incompatible with life.
Now, what strikes me interesting about this response is that it is a vigorous response, I think, and meant to be a vigorous challenge against the fine-tuning argument, partly, I think, because the fine-tuning argument seems so compelling to so many people.
Yeah, and they don't deny fine-tuning. Again, this is one of the positive aspects of this book that is helpful to the theist, is they characterize fine-tuning as being almost miraculous in their words.
Describe what you mean by fine-tuning here for people who might not be familiar with that.
What I mean is that the initial conditions of the universe, given in the Big Bang, are so finely calibrated for intelligent life that if they were altered by just the tiniest bit, less than a hair's breadth, life would be impossible. So the universe looks like it's been exquisitely designed to produce intelligent life. And Hawking and Molodinoff don't dispute that. They say, yes, it looks that way. There is an apparently miraculous fine-tuning, but they will use all of these many other worlds to explain it away, just like having many roulette wheels turning at the same time.
Okay, now here's the question that I have we see how the explanation is meant to work, but there are some assumptions that are built into these explanations that need to be accurate in order for this to be a valid rebuttal to the fine-tuning argument. What are some of those assumptions?
Well, one assumption would be that there even are these other universes, that there are other worlds.
Pardon me for chuckling, but that would be an important detail, I think.
That's the main point. If this is going to be a scientific hypothesis as opposed to a metaphysical speculation, then they need to specify what is the physical mechanism that generates these many worlds. And there are lots of different suggestions, and Hawking's chosen mechanism is what's called the sum over histories. And if I could just try to explain this very briefly, when a subatomic particle goes from point A to point B, you can't predict exactly the path it follows. So physicists say, well, let's assume it follows all possible paths, and then we'll take an average of them to find which path it most probably followed. Well, what Hawking does is he interprets all of those paths to be equally real and to be each one in a different universe. So he takes what is just a mathematical calculating trick and invests it with metaphysical reality to get his many worlds. And that's just a wild use of this sum over history's mathematical trick that it was never intended to be a piece of metaphysics.
So would it be fair to say that it looks suspiciously like he's kind of manufacturing these multiple universes because it solves this problem for him? It allows him to get out from underneath the impact of the fine-tuning.
They deny that, Greg, but I know
they do.
Quite true. I think that's true because Feynman's sum over histories is just a mathematical calculating device. These aren't real, these other universes or other paths, and it's only by investing them with reality that he can try to get his many worlds to avoid
what I thank you, Bill. I want people to see that there is a lot of kind of bald-faced asserting that seems to be going on here, but because it's done by this man with his credentials, and because there's a lot of quantum mechanics language, lends, it's almost blinding with science and lends credibility to these bare assertions, like the bare assertion that there are no violations to the laws of nature. He never proves that. He never shows that. He just says it.
Yeah, and other scientists aren't fooled.
Yeah, well, that's good. And so, what are some of the other assumptions that have to be in place? You mentioned that they have to be random universes too, not just that they exist, but they have to be random.
They have to be randomly ordered, and you have to say there's a sufficient number of them, preferably infinite, in order to guarantee that the finely tuned universe will appear somewhere. And none of those assumptions are proven either. They're just all adopted ad hoc.
Well, it's good to hear these things because these are some of the things that I saw when I was reading in this material. But even for myself, there is it gives one pause when you see a person of Stephen Hawking's stature that makes these pronouncements, and then I see something I think is amiss, and I think, gee, well, maybe I'm the one who's making the mistake and not him. But these seem to be significant drawbacks of his approach, his presumptions, his assumptions, his methodology, his conclusions. All of these things are in question.
Yeah, I think anybody who has mastered the arguments that I lay out in Reasonable Faith will already be equipped to answer these objections raised in this book because there isn't anything new that I haven't already discussed there.
I think you mentioned there too, or maybe I'm thinking of your blog, that even if there are multiple universes, you're back to the cosmological problem, you still need a cause for those universes, right?
Yeah, that's right. We've not solved the origin problem of where did that South Pole, in his model come from. And moreover, Roger Penrose has raised very significant criticisms of the many worlds hypothesis as an explanation of the fine-tuning, and he doesn't even interact with the criticisms of his erstwhile colleague, Roger Penrose, which I take to be just deliberate blindness. You can't just ignore the published critiques of many worlds by a man like Roger Penrose, as they do in this book.
So would you say... what would you say as an assessment of an overall assessment, generalization of Stephen Hawking's attempted critique or response to the cosmological argument and the fine-tuning argument, the teleological argument?
I think his work on the cosmological argument is a positive asset to the soundness of the argument. I think it's very helpful, and it reinforces the second premise that the universe began to exist. So I look at it as very helpful. I'm going to be quoting this book. On the second one, on the fine-tuning, I think there we have to say that it's based upon wild metaphysical speculations that are not science at all, but are tendentious interpretations of mathematical models.